What we're seeing right now is that has been this shift with the Trump administration embracing the furthest right-wing elements of the Israeli government far more openly than any previous US administration. But at the same time, there has been an extraordinary shift in the public discourse in the United States about the issue, and a significant, although not as dramatic, but a significant shift in the media coverage. So you now have a very different political environment. It's also become far more partisan than it ever was before. You know, historically, in the early days of US support for Israel, it was a Democratic Party liberal issue. It was liberals who supported Israel. It was the idea that Israel was a kind of socialist or semi-socialist little enclave in this desert, and the kibbutz movement was what we all studied as young Jews in the United States. It was all very exciting. And of course, no one asked the question of, well, where did that land come from? Who was already there? This was what was left out. Yeah. But that was the discourse. That sort of party-based thing, that it was the Democrats who supported Israel, that lasted for a really long time. But over the last 20 years, that's been gradually shifting. And now it's overwhelmingly the other way around, where Israel, support for Israel, this uncritical embrace of everything Israel does, says, is far more a Republican thing than a Democratic thing. And you have, more importantly than the two parties, you have young people, you have this generational divide where young people are overwhelmingly turning against Israel, partly because for the first time you have a generation that grew up not just hearing about, you know, Israel made the desert bloom, but seeing on their phone and on their computer and on their television what Israel was actually doing. So in that context, and you have that shift, of course, within the Jewish community as well. You have now, there was always just one position in the Jewish community. Now you have a left, a right, and a center. And increasingly younger people are moving to the left. Middle-aged people are moving to the center. And it's the old folks with the money who are staying on the right, you know. So that's changed it. And in Congress, you know, this idea, we always used to joke about Congress being the last bastion, that Congress was going to be the hardest thing to change. And all of a sudden, there's these changes underway when you talked earlier today about Netanyahu coming to the United States to convince Congress and the American people to go against Obama's planned Iran nuclear deal. It was an outrage. And in response to that, 60 members of Congress skipped the speech. That had never happened before. Now, most of them, I would say, didn't skip necessarily because of Israeli attacks on Palestinians. They mainly skipped it because they were so outraged at the racism in how Netanyahu dealt with President Obama. It was a lot of members of the Black Caucus who were at the core of that contingent. But nonetheless, there were no consequences. Everybody saw that the 60 members said publicly, I am not going to go listen to this man. It's an outrage. And the sky didn't fall. And they didn't lose their seats. You know, that was huge. You know, that was huge. Betty McCollum, who represents this community, we're talking today in Minnesota, she represents what she calls a mostly white, middle class, well, she doesn't say, but it's a relatively very mainstream kind of congressional district. But it's not a place that has given rise to the firebrands of Congress, you know. And Betty McCollum is leading the charge in the Congress. She now has 29 members supporting her bill as co-sponsors, as you know, to say the U.S. cannot be involved in the Israeli juvenile military court system. It's the only country in the world that has one. And she's saying, no, we can't be part of that. That's an outrage. So we do have this shift underway in Congress. And I think that's what a lot of people here are focused on, is changing the U.S. policy. But that's what now is facing the Netanyahu government. They've got the Trump administration. But increasingly, Congress is not so clearly on that side. So it's going to open up, I think, some new possibilities, certainly for us, but also inside Israel itself.